Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi!
Hello friends, new patch and more new characters. You'll have seen the character Sy-Gex mentioned in the patch notes, and you'll be able to fight against him as an enemy in several places. He is an enemy in the upcoming Admech campaign, and he is an enemy in the Actus side boss fight for the Belisarius Call raid boss. I figured I would just do my usual character showcase so that you can see what the character is like prior to his future release. Sy-Gex is an uncommon unlock. As usual, his model and animations are pretty awesome. He has 3 traits: Heavy Weapon, Overwatch, and Vehicle, and is the first playable character with a vehicle trait. This vehicle trait also makes Sy-Gex count as a mechanical unit, which is important for inter-faction synergy. The stats on screen are at Diamond 3. I'll take a closer look later on to show you how this compares to other characters in the game. Sy-Gex has a base movement speed of 2, he has a 4-hit melee flame attack, and a 4-hit ranged physical attack at 3 range. This makes him the first character in the game that has a ranged physical attack. Sy-Gex's active ability is called Sentinel Directives. It's pretty straightforward. This does physical damage to an enemy unit within range 3 and suppresses it, but this ability cannot be used if there is an enemy adjacent to Sy-Gex. After using this ability, Sy-Gex can attack again or enter Overwatch if he doesn't attack. The passive ability is called Heavy Grav Cannon. This gives Sy-Gex bonus ranged attack damage and pierce ratio against enemies with Gravis armor, Terminator armor, or mechanical units. The abilities are pretty easy to understand, but let's take a look at the gameplay clips before we delve into the math and analysis. Here, the character uses his active ability, dealing damage to a target within 3 hexes. As you can see, after the active, Sy-Gex can move and attack again. The passive ability is demonstrated here. In these side-by-side clips, you can see Sy-Gex attacking Ulf and Snappereka. I've chosen these 2 characters because they both have identical health and armor stats at the same level, but obviously the Orc is a mech. All characters are at Diamond 3. Sy-Gex does okay damage against Ulf, but certainly nothing to write home about. Against Snappereka though, he comfortably kills the Orc Killer Khan due to the bonus damage from his passive ability. Probably the place to start before analysing the passive and its power level is simply identifying the characters that Sy-Gex can potentially be good against. There are 14 mechanical characters in the game, including Sy-Gex himself. There are a further 9 Terminators and 3 Gravis armor characters. I've just looked at playable characters here, not bosses or summoned units. If we continue these to be the characters that Sy-Gex is super effective against, it's not a bad list, but not the most exhaustive either. The best way to evaluate Sy-Gex is probably to take a deep dive into the math, since he's really a character that's all about damage. Firstly, his damage stat is huge. Coupled with 4 hits against a target with no armor, he is in the top 5 damage dealers in the game. However, characters do have armor, so what's his expected damage? You might be familiar with this style of slide from previous videos. We work out the expected damage that Sy-Gex should do against an enemy of an equal level. So with everyone at Diamond 3, with average armor being around 1900, Sy-Gex doesn't really do an impressive amount of damage, especially when noting that average health at this level is about 8300. We run the numbers comparatively against the other groups of interest. Against mechs, the damage output improves significantly courtesy of the passive bonus damage and pierce ratio. Against Terminators, the numbers are less impressive due to the 75% damage reduction for the Terminator trait. You can easily work around this by making sure that Sy-Gex isn't the first unit to attack a Terminator, but let's include it for the calculations just for now. Finally, the numbers against Gravis armor are on screen. I realise that not everyone likes the math or understands it very well, so I've worked with Towen, Tacticus ambassador and friend, to come up with these graphs. We'll start with the Gravis units graph to understand the colouring. Each bar here represents a character's total hit points. Then we've added a colour to represent the damage done through the base attack, then adding the 25% buff from Heavy Weapon, then the 50% buff from High Ground, then 87.5% from both of those buffs combined, as these bonuses are multiplied rather than added together. We're not using average armor here, just a calculation of Sy-Gex's damage versus each character's individual armor and HP. So Sy-Gex's basic attack almost one-shots Bellator with high ground and heavy weapon buffs. The graph for Terminator armor looks less impressive, but that is because we are applying a 75% negative damage debuff, treating it as if it's the first attack of the turn against the Terminator. If Sy-Gex wasn't the first attack against the Terminator, this is what the graph would look like without that 75% damage reduction. So essentially, if Sy-Gex doesn't attack first, he should still kill most Terminators. Against the mechs, Sy-Gex's basic attack is pretty tremendous. His basic attack is enough to kill most mechs on its own, and with high ground he can kill all of them. Very impressive. This is what the graph looks like for the non-mechanical, non-Terminator and non-Gravis units. We move from left to right with the most hit points remaining. You can see the characters on the left tend to have lower armor, and the ones on the right tend to have a higher armor value. This graph shows that Sy-Gex falls off pretty hard against those high armor targets like Jaeger, Rotbone and Corrodius. The graph is quite zoomed out, but hopefully still illustrative. I'm a pretty visual guy, and I have to thank Towen again for his help in putting these graphs together. One of the most common questions I get asked is how does the enemy AI control the character on defense? I have running on screen a couple of AI versus AI battles. Sy-Gex is on both teams and seems to use his active fairly freely. With mechs on both sides, Sy-Gex is literally a killing machine. Having talked through his kit and showcased his abilities, here's a summary slide that shows the abilities and stats of Sy-Gex at various cutoffs. Feel free to pause or screenshot if you'd like. The character is summarized on screen in my usual infographic style. The numbers on the right are at Diamond 3. Towen, Tacticus Ambassador and Friend, has run those comparatively against the existing characters. I've spent a lot of time already talking about the passive and how it affects this character's damage. Obviously it also applies to his active, which is a huge chunk of damage and doesn't even cost Sy-Gex his turn. This leads us to consider where the character might shine. Let's start with Horde modes. Sy-Gex isn't the most durable, isn't able to summon nor kill multiple enemies in a turn, except for the single turn where he uses his active ability. Accordingly, I don't think this character will be great in Horde mode. I'll give him a 1.5 here. What about War? I think Sy-Gex will be incredible against mechanical enemies, and also alongside Exeter Row, allowing him to trigger twice in one turn. He'll be pretty good, but not an all-star due to how niche he is, so I think a score of 3.5 is reasonable. Finally, Guild Raids. He is a mech and can do good damage, but he doesn't seem like he'll be the best in slot versions for any particular team. Accordingly, I'll give him a 2.5. Having established his usability, here are some ideas for characters that pair well with him. Having 4 hits with 61% pierce makes him an attractive candidate to pair with buffers like Calgar, who give him a bonus for being Imperial, or Eldrion or Thaddeus. He obviously works well with Exeter Row because his active lets him attack twice in a turn and give you a big chunk of burst damage at the start of a fight. If the enemies are mechs, you might be happier repairing him with Actus over Tangida. It's worth highlighting his poor movement of 2. This could be a hindrance in terms of getting to high ground or the right position, so Makotep could be good company. Sy-Gex has natural weaknesses against high armor targets due to his low pierce. He might be good to combine with units that reduce armor, and the Death Guard team seem like an obvious solution. The Death Guard provide the tanky frontline, and with their armor reduction, Sy-Gex is able to provide them with the much needed ranged damage. Vitruvius and Tangida also give him some armor reduction within the AdMech faction. There you go, another character showcase. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks as always to my Patreons for their support. This time I've included Towen's referral code on screen as a small thank you for all of his help and support. Bye for now.
Doo-doo-dee. It's Nandi.